Good morning, everybody. My name's Lloyd Stokes. This is the most recent episode of Sourced Presents. And for those who have never tuned in and listened before, Sourced Presents is a podcast that we set up about 18 months ago. Actually, in truth, we didn't set it up as a podcast to begin with. It was an interview series that we wanted to create where I could interview and shine a light on a whole host of different people from a variety of backgrounds who were in our world. So loosely speaking, the kind of like tech, startup, scale up ecosystem, but people that I've either worked with or had connections with, or indeed people that I've never met before. And it's been an absolute journey of discovery. And at the end of last year, we decided to make this into a fully fledged podcast. So for those listening for the first time, you're hopefully listening to this on Spotify, or you're watching it on YouTube, or you're seeing the clips on LinkedIn. But I hope you enjoy it. And today I'm always excited to speak to guests. Some I know better than others. Today's guest, Alister Gray, is somebody that I have known for a long time. Many years. Our paths first crossed in Covent Garden when we were working for the same recruitment business. We were both clearly a lot younger, a lot earlier on in our career. I think it would be fair to say that our motivations and drivers at the time were very different to what we have now. And I think it would be fair to say that we are quite different people in comparison to what we were probably in kind of 2006, 2007, around that period. So, but Alister, I'll leave him to introduce himself. But if I were to quickly summarize our friendship, we've known each other for a long time. We worked together, we stayed close. He had a really interesting journey working for a number of different businesses, and then for the majority now, I guess probably of your adult life, have been a executive coach amongst many other things, and certainly you are without doubt one of the most interesting people that I have in my network and as a friend. And we have so many interesting conversations just on the fly that I thought that actually let's try and make this a little bit more formal and turn it into a podcast episode. So the purpose of today, hopefully, is that we will talk about Alister's background and kind of his journey and go into a bit more around kind of what he does now and how he works with people and groups and teams and businesses in lots of different guises, but around the kind of, I guess, the new year vibe of, you know, people coming into a new year. A lot of people have had very challenging work and business 2024s for lots of different reasons. There's a huge amount of change that exists in the world. There are a lot of pressures. There are a lot of challenges that people face. And that's not just specific to tech. That's across a broad range of industries and sectors. And I think talking to Alister, as I have done over years and years and years, there are so many things that can be done that can help people to face those challenges and to thrive actually in those challenges. And hopefully today we're going to cover some of that, talking around some of his recent kind of learnings and experiences. So as always, I start these things talking for way too long, and it's now definitely time for me to hand over to somebody who's more interesting. Alister, thank you for joining me. You know how much I appreciate this. Maybe for those listening, you could start by giving a little bit of a intro to you and a little bit of background to your story.
Cool. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Lloyd. It's good to be doing this formally. I'm always curious when people say, I'm one of the most interesting people they know. I think it's a polite way of saying one of the weirdest people that they know as well. So
it just suggests I don't know very many interesting people.
Probably. Or you don't know that many people. But no,
both are true.
But you got a big network, so I take it as a compliment. And I'm looking forward to today, because it's, like you said, we've had so many conversations on the fly over the years. It was actually 2008 where we first connected. I moved to London. You were my line manager, weren't you? You were my line manager when I joined recruitment.
Indeed.
And showed me the ropes, and I learned so much from you. So to come full circle and now be in this position where for the past decade we've been running our own businesses it's very cool. So thank you for having me. Should I begin by giving you a little bit of an overview about like what I am and what I do, and then give some context to where it began and how it began?
Yeah. Let's start by who you are today, what you do today, and there's a lot there, I know, so we might not get the chance to unpack all of it, but let's do that first, and then let's kind of take it back a bit and talk around how you got to find yourself and why there's so much value that I think that you bring now in comparison to maybe other people who do similar things to you.
Okay, amazing. So for the past 10 years, I've run a company called Mindful Talent, and what's interesting, Lloyd, you'll remember this, is that one of the biggest encouragements when I decided to set up Mindful Talent was actually you and the journey you'd went on, because I think around probably 3 or 4 months prior, you'd taken the leap to set up your agency. And I remember you and I talking at the time, and it inspired me to take that leap. I was already considering it. I was being drawn to a different path, and then those conversations that you and I had kind of gave me the confidence in many ways to say, yeah, I can do this as well. So 10 years ago, 10 years this year anyway, we set up Mindful Talent, and really that was off the back of a number of life changes on a personal level that was pointing me in a different direction. And that direction that fueled that move was this feeling within me that I wanted to help people, and more specifically, I wanted to help people from the perspective of them understanding themselves on a deeper level. The mind, body, spirit, understanding how they can live their life, and also how they can navigate their career and their businesses from a place of wholeness, from a place of feeling, a sense of clarity and purpose and meaning and all these things. So that was like the fuel that pointed me in this direction. And so at the time, I knew that that's what I wanted to do, but I never knew how to do it. So I ended up training as a coach. I found an incredible coach training company run by my dear friend who became my business partner, Michelle Armstrong, and I trained as a coach. And I remember going through that training, sitting in that room and just thinking, I'm in the right place. This is absolutely what I'm meant to do at this moment in my life. And I found it was a very natural process for me. I always say I was one of Michelle's worst students. I wasn't as studious as some of my peers, and everyone was always engaging on the online chat and submitting their homework on time, and I was a hot mess. I was submitting my coursework last minute, but I was naturally very comfortable in the role of the coach, and I put that down to a few things. One, I'm a very curious person. Two, I had a deep interest in the human experience, and three, I genuinely wanted to help people. And there's as long as I can remember, there's always been a part of me that wants to help and add value and contribute to other people's lives. So that I found coaching, and this was like a vehicle that allowed me to do all of these things that were quite natural. And of course, going through the coaching journey, I learned that there were skills and attributes that could be enhanced and improved significantly, especially things like listening and questioning and holding space and being silent. And all of this kind of resonated with me on a deeper level because in my personal life, I was also embarking on a very holistic path, which included meditation. And I'll touch on that a little bit later. So for the last 10 years, I've been a coach to executives and founders and CEOs. And that ranges from, as you know, some of my clients, startups to scale-ups to Fortune 500 companies. And I've had a beautiful opportunity to work with people at every end of that spectrum. I've also had the opportunity to support creatives People who have done incredible things in the world, Grammy Award winners, people who are influencers. And so I've had a really broad, experience of working with people from so many different, walks of life and so many different diverse backgrounds. And so that's been one part. Now, over that course of the 10 years, we developed a coaching academy where I trained over 600 professional coaches and accredited them through the Association of Coaching. And most recently, we've hit pause in our academy as I've felt drawn to developing communities, and specifically communities who are interested in exploring their inner world through the process of meditation and self-inquiry. And so I'm teaching a lot now about awareness, meditation, and also well-being practices that can help people to navigate life with more grace and ease, but also to thrive in life at what is, quite a chaotic and difficult time. So that's the kind of the overview.
I love that. I think that what I find interesting is the term coach is become so popular, and actually I think is becoming more and more and more popular. People are really understanding on a human, one-to-one level and at a business level that the benefits of having a coach and somebody, and there are other kind of people look at mentorship and training, etc. But the idea of actually working with somebody who really does coach somebody through challenges and rather than just maybe the age-old route of trying to find the answers yourself, then I just find fascinating. I find fascinating on so many levels, and the point around going back to kind of one of the most interesting. The reason and I was thinking this as you were talking. The reason why I think you're one of the most interesting people that I know is that, this is something that I believe is so important for in my opinion, for young people, is that you've had a very varied life. You've done a lot of different things, and explored and experienced different jobs, different careers, different groups of people, different geographies, and that for me that's what makes somebody interesting, because you can draw on so many different experiences. And if I think about when we first met, I know that you'd had like this life before being in London, where you were doing you were doing kind of like club nights and promotion, and I was like, who's this guy? This guy like runs like club nights. You missed it. Like I thought you were Mr. Edinburgh. But I think that all of those layers create the person, right? And maybe in today's world, there's too much pressure on young people coming out of education, or to try and find their thing and nail their career and what it is that they want to do immediately. And I think largely, that's unrealistic. There are a percentage of people who you just think, maybe quite fortunately, have clarity around what they want to do, but the majority just don't. Do you want that's what I think makes you interesting, and maybe it would be good for I guess the audience to understand how and why you came to make the decision to change path, because I know that you had a few different kind of like career routes, and ultimately there was a point where you realised this is not for me. This is too. I need to take a different direction. Do you mind kind of talking a bit about that?
Yeah, and thanks also, Lloyd, for sharing the clarification on the interesting part. And I think what you shared resonates deeply, because not that I was thinking I need to live a varied life in order to develop, a breadth of experiences that will serve me in life. It was that I was always curious to push the edge of my life experience. So I was a major disappointment to my parents when I decided not to go to university and instead go to Ibiza for 6 months, when I was 18. So I was the first one in my family that had the opportunity to go to university, had the grades, could have went, started filling out my UCAS form and thought, I don't know what the heck I want to do. Why would I go and do something for the sake of it? But I knew that I loved house music. So I was like, I'm going to go to Ibiza instead and just give myself 6 months to figure this out. Now, I could tell my mum was devastated at the time. She was upset because she would have loved to have gone to university herself. But to be fair to my mum, she never stopped me. And I want to really give credit to, my mum and my dad, but especially my mum, who, one, knew that I was really headstrong, so probably thought it's not worth it. But two, also trusted that I was going to find my way. So that, that trip to Ibiza, subsequently when I came home, I thought university is not for me. I want to earn money. I want to learn how to do things in the world, and I want to travel. And so those things were like quite central to, my life experience, because just before coming down to London, I'd travelled the world for a year. So I'd ran the nightclubs for like 3-4 years. I'd went into a sales role, and then I went travelling for a year. And then travelling opened up my mind to a whole new world. I think travelling shaped me in a way that I never expected. Even though I was pretty much drinking every night and partying every night, there was still this cultural experience where, we did go and see different parts of the world. We've seen people from such varying backgrounds, and I think that left such an imprint on me. And then when I came back to Edinburgh felt small, for me, and I thought I need to expand, and what was the next natural thing? Well, London, and that wasn't again a choice about my career. That was because I'd went to Berlin on a party weekend, met a group of people from London who I thought was cool, and on the train home, my friend and I, Keith, who said, shall we move to London? So it wasn't strategic. It was actually just following this sense of, that's exciting, this feels good, this this has drawn me, and I think that's what I've trusted throughout my life and my career, is this pull towards something that's interesting, new, that takes me outside my comfort zone. And what that's led to is, it's led to quite a colourful, varied life experience. And of course, where that now is working to my advantage is that I can relate to a lot of different people from so many different backgrounds, because of travel, because of interest, because of curiosity. And I think when you're a coach or someone that holds space for people in that way, it's such an advantage, because you're able to relate to someone quite easily based on your life circumstances and experiences that you've had. So just to give a little bit of context and to come back to your question, where what made me change direction in my life, when I left the recruitment company that you and I were at, I joined a marketing agency, and throughout my career, and you'll testify this, Lloyd, I've worked hard, right? I came from a working class background. I was born into a family that, my parents were relatively poor. When I was born, my mum worked 3 jobs to make ends meet. My dad worked every hour under the sun, 6 days a week. And so hard work was always instilled in me. And so I was never the smartest person in the room whenever I joined the company, but I was always the person that could trust that I would outwork and out hustle anyone. And I also had a desire to learn, right? So that's never left me. And so when I joined the marketing agency that I actually placed myself in, I worked hard. I got promoted into a leadership role, inherited a team, and at the time I was successful, but I was burning the candle at both ends. And, I was working hard, and then I was partying harder. And that partying was, one, because I loved it. I loved music. I loved coming together with a group of friends. I loved dancing. But equally, it was also masking the stress and the overwhelm that I was beginning to feel. And that overwhelm began coming to a head within, I think it was the second year with the company. I'd been promoted into this position. The company had secured a huge deal with a major credit card company, and there was a lot of pressure that I was feeling in order to deliver against that deal. I was head of partnerships at the time. And so I began, I never knew at the time, but I began burning out, is the truth. And the only way that I knew that was because my body was actually the thing that was breaking down. So I had several hospital visits, I was exhibiting all of these, these physical ailments that were suggesting that my body was at a breaking point. And it was. And so at that time, I was working from 7 a.m. through till, midnight. I'd be drinking, I'd be taking recreational drugs at the weekend. I was kind of just doing anything to survive and get through it. And my girlfriend at the time said, Ali, you need to change. She said, you're losing your optimism. You're not the same person that I know. Your focus, you can't even focus on our conversations. You need to change. And she said, I think you should begin meditating or try meditating. And so the reason I give that context was that at a point where I was burning out, someone reflected that back to me, someone who loved me. And thankfully, I listened. I resisted it at first, but I listened. And that's when, for the very first time, I began meditating. Now, that's important in the context of, what made me change careers, because about a year later, I left London. I went traveling through Central and South America, and I asked the question, if meditation can help me when I'm feeling stressed and overwhelmed, what would happen if I was to meditate every day? And where that led me was really towards the path that I'm now on, which was this deep curiosity about the human mind. And having come from a background where family members had suffered from mental health conditions and seen the impact that had had on people, when I discovered meditation and I began learning about the human mind and also the brain, something just began grabbing my attention. And I began thinking that if there's this practice that I'm doing in my own life, which is clearly helping me to become less stressed, more focused, to become aware of how I'm actually feeling, because so many of us live in our heads, so many are disassociated with the body, then there's something in this. And so I returned home from travels. I joined a French startup up in Scotland, a recruitment firm, as you know. We scaled super quick without investment. And all the time, I was developing my meditation practice. So I was kind of living two lives. I was living this very fast-paced, successful entrepreneur life. And on the other hand, I was meditating and becoming more and more interested with Eastern philosophy, meditation, and spirituality. And so, there came a point after, I think, 3.5 years of going through that scale, that startup mode and then into scale up, where I realized that actually, there was a fork in the road. That this side, the more holistic path, was beginning to call me. And so that's where I began, shifting into this new direction.
And when you that journey that you went on, when you meet new people now who are through different paths or who connect with you or get introduced to you, you mentioned that the initial thought process was some resistance from your side. As in, because it was new, and the idea of meditation, and also maybe a lack of acknowledgement or not wanting to accept the fact that things weren't right. Do you find that's often the case, or do you find when you're working with new people, is there especially, let's say, people who haven't done anything like this before? So I remember when we first spoke, and we talked lots about meditation, and I quite openly would be like, I just think that's a bit kind of woo-woo, kind of like not, and that's because of a lack of understanding from my perspective. And it's maybe also I never had been at a point yet in my life where I felt like that was something I needed to find a different route or a different answer. but I definitely did. You know, I remember you and I talked about years ago, when we were like personally going through the challenges of trying to conceive as a couple, Ginny and I, and we just couldn't. And I found it incredibly challenging because it was the first time in my life where I had no control over something, and I couldn't find the answers. And it just so happened that coincided with also working in London still, not enjoying it, not feeling fulfilled. There was a lot of on reflection, there was a lot of sadness in my life for a short period of time. And thankfully, you know, to date, that's probably been the only time in my life where I've really experienced that. But I remember you and I talked about the idea of meditation, and I ended up, even though I had those kind of like feelings and not reservations, but I was like, yeah, I don't think that's for me. That's for my mate Ali. I'm not. But the point is that I went and did a course and a session of mindfulness classes, and it was just a revelation for me. It was at that moment in time, and it's exactly what I needed at that moment in time. But I definitely had. It took a little bit to accept the fact that I maybe needed to, and it also took a bit of desperation, if I'm honest, for me thinking, I don't feel like I'm coping with this very well. I need to find a different path, and so I did. And I guess my question to you in summary is, do you often find that there's a pivotal moment that leads people to explore something new, and is there often some kind of resistance at first?
Yeah, so the answer to both questions is yes. The resistance in me, which is probably the same for you, but maybe in a slightly different form, there was a few different spaces of resistance in me. The first one is I never wanted to admit that I needed help. I found that so difficult. As someone who had worn this badge of independence, you know, when my parents split up when I was 16 or 17, I was independent. You know, I became independent. I became responsible for my life, right? Which I know you can relate to. And so for me to admit that I needed help, that was one of the biggest hurdles to overcome. Also one of the biggest hurdles to overcome when I first hired my first coach. I didn't want to admit that I needed help. The second thing was, I'd grown up throughout my life being told I was an atheist. I was told that that's who I am. And so when meditation, the word was mentioned, I remember saying, that's not for me, it's for religious people. So I'd made an assumption, that meditation was something. And that was just a complete lack of understanding, lack of awareness. And what's interesting is, having been such an open person in my life, I recognise there was some edges to that. Right? Suddenly there's this thing that's unknown, a little bit, what felt foreign or something that was different. And I said, I don't think that's for me. And part of the reason for that, which was the third place of resistance, was the feeling like, what would people think of me? That was the biggest one. I remember the first time I sat down to meditate. It was a 21-day challenge, and I began listening, and it was a Deepak Chopra 21-day challenge, which I love, and I love his work. And I began listening, and what was interesting, and I can tell you the exact place that I was in my apartment in London, in Hackney, and I began listening to this, and the first thought I had was, what would my friends think of me?
Yep.
So interesting. So I never realized at the time, but I was being internally governed by the concerns and worries of what people would think of me, by the identity that had been bestowed upon me throughout my life and who I thought I was and why this thing wouldn't be for me, and also the imprisonment of, I can't ask for help because it's going to mean that I'm weak. People are going to think I can't do things, I'm not good enough, all these limiting beliefs that were lying under the surface. So on some level, I think there is a resistance to something that's new. And those resistances will take a different form for everyone, but there will probably be quite a lot of similarities to what I shared. And so, there will often be a resistance from people when they come, and sometimes that resistance they might not know the deeper reasons behind it. It might just be people saying, I've not got enough time. But when you begin to sit with the person and understand them on a deeper level, you usually find that there is some form of resistance that is preventing them from being open to it.
Is it challenging? Because I think about like the world that we spend a lot of our time in, but also just if you're the kind of person who is going to have it, not the kind of person. If you've got to a point where you thought, I might need a coach, or I'd like to explore the idea of a coach, you're probably at a stage, majoritively, you're probably at a stage in your career where you have a lot of challenge and a lot of pressure and a lot of responsibility. That's not to say that's the only path, of course it's not, but a lot of people will have a overburden and weight and pressure that they feel and that it is on them. And they'll be working in environments where high performance and performing your best and being seen to be strong and powerful and decisive and all of those characteristics that people they prize so heavily. But do you often find that when you meet people who are in that and you really start to break it down, you realise that they don't understand them? I definitely speak from experience where I think that period of reflection and actually like understanding who actually am I, what really do I stand for, ultimately has made me a better person, but also has made me a better leader and a better individual in business, because I've stopped trying to be the person that I think I need to be. And do you find that's common?
Yeah, absolutely. When people, and this links a little bit to your second question a moment ago, where you said, is it often something that happens that brings people to coaching? Is it? Unfortunately, you find that suffering is one of the biggest motivators for people to make change. It took me to get to a place of burnout before I recognised that I had to ask for help. Unfortunately, I see the majority of people reach a point of suffering before they make a decision to either receive help or to seek out help. Now, I have seen over the last 10 years a shift beginning to emerge where people are seeking out coaches, therapists, individuals who can hold space and support them, where they come with a more proactive approach. I remember there was a seminal moment for me when I was in London coaching one day, and I was having sessions in Soho House in Covent Garden, and I had one client who was in Soho House and who I was meeting, and another client I was scheduled to meet afterwards. And I was sitting in the reception, and there was a moment where the client that I was coming to meet was coming down the stairs, and the other client was coming in through the door. And I had a moment thinking, how am I going to navigate this? I want to make sure I maintain confidentiality, all these things. And what was amazing was that, one of the clients shouts from up the stairs, Alister, how you doing? It's good to see you. And then the other client who I was meeting with at that time said, how do you know Alister? Alister's my coach. And then the other person coming down the stairs, he's my coach as well. Now, these are two really senior executives, and I thought that openness, to express that they had a coach, and not only were they happy to share that, they were also proud to talk about this support that was in their life. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, things are beginning to shift and change, because I think previously coaching, therapy maybe had this stigma around it, right? And I've began to see over the last 10 years that change quite significantly. So, I think on one hand, people get to a point of suffering or pain or challenge that brings them to it, and I think that's still the majority. But on the other hand, there is this emergence of, people coming to coaching because they see that there's an opportunity to help navigate through either a change or an opportunity that life may be kind of bringing to them. So I just wanted to touch on that, Lloyd, to show there is a shift happening, I believe.
I completely agree. I kind of quite poorly articulated it earlier in the chat, but I think that's what I was alluding to. I think that maybe rather than just or majoritively individuals reaching a point of crisis or of like desperation to find an answer, what I see a lot more, I see it on social media. I definitely see it on LinkedIn. There's so much on LinkedIn around self-development and coaching, and I see people much earlier on in their careers kind of exploring that and looking to say, oh, I've got a coach, I've got somebody who helps me with this, and I think that's really interesting, because that's a big shift, and it's not always about high performance, for example. It's about just personal development and looking to understand where are my edges, what are the parameters that I've put in place. What I find interesting is how do you think somebody, let's say, who's maybe, it doesn't matter about age necessarily, but just they're just earlier in their life or earlier in their career, what are some of the things that you think people can be doing that, without necessarily having to go the whole hog and getting a coach, but to help them within their lives? Because you read so much now around the mental health challenges that young people face. You can't move for content and advice around kind of how people should live, whether it be the right amount of exercise, the right nutrition, the right don't drink, do drink. You should be following routines. You should be journaling. You should be you could get consumed with trying to do everything, and I personally don't believe that's necessarily a good thing either. Like, I think there has to be like balance in life. But what, in your view, what are some of the things that maybe everybody could be doing that would have impact, and that they would see difference without necessarily needing to go the whole hog and getting a coach straight away?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've seen a lot, especially over the last 12 months, this is based on my interactions with clients and with people and with friends and family, is I was noticing more and more people were showing the symptoms of burnout, stress, overwhelm. And if you think about it on a micro and a macro level, as people, we have a lot to navigate daily life, whether that's work, career, parenthood, responsibilities of family and friendships. There's just a lot that we put on our plates now and attempt to manage, and then throw a healthy dose of expectation on ourselves. And it's just becoming so much. Now you couple that with the macro, what's going on in our world, with wars and conflict and genocide and wildfires that have been taking place in the past week. There's a lot for us to take in as human beings right now. And yet what we tend to do as human beings is we keep on taking on more. So coming to your point where, even in the world of well-being, like you said, there's a lot of noise about you should be doing these hundreds of things to feel well. Well, in some respects, those things will help. But if you just pile more and more on your plate, even though those things come with good intentions, you're going to continue feeling overwhelmed. So the thing that I'm noticing with all of my clients, bar none, is this container that is their life that is so full and with very little space. And that's almost true for every single person that I work with.
Yeah.
And I think it's a demonstration of quite an accurate demonstration of what is present for most people in the world. And what we tend to do is we take something off our plate in a moment of crisis, and then when we feel a little bit better, we put something else back on it. So for me, the place that you can begin is first of all identifying what truly matters most in your life. And then to determine what are the things that you're giving your time, energy and focus to that doesn't matter and that is offering very little value to your life. Like, what are the things that you're saying yes to from a place of obligation?
Yeah.
You know, what are the things that you're committing to that are taking you away from the things that matter the most? You know, what are the things that you're saying yes to that as soon as you say yes, you immediately feel the dread? Because we all have them, but we continue in the process. We try and keep up appearances. We feel like we have to, or the sense of obligation drives us, but at the detriment of us feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, stressed, overwhelmed, burnout. And then that has a ripple effect on all other areas of life, our relationships, our ability to parent. And so what I'm seeing as a necessity for people to live life from a place of wholeness is to first of all create space and time where you can have the opportunity to breathe a little bit deeper, where you can begin to regulate your nervous system, where you can spend more time on the things that matter most and let go of the things that don't. And I think that almost like a life analysis is a great place for anyone to start. And it takes time to begin letting go of things and to begin welcoming in things that may support this newer, healthier way of being. But I promise you that it will have a significant impact on every area of life, on your career, on your health, your well-being, and that's across all areas, your mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual, your relationships. But this is some of the work that I find myself doing a lot with executives, especially. They're just so busy, and they're burning out, in front of the people who love them the most.
Do you find that, we talked about this before, but I'm somebody who routine is something that I crave and thrive when I have a kind of very set, clear, consistent routine. However, I also can sometimes find that quite limiting, as in I get myself into a headspace where I'm like, that's my routine, that's my structure. So for example, I get up at this time, I do this, then I do this, then I do this. And if that all happens, then I mentally go, yeah, good, I've started the day as I intended to. If something doesn't happen in that, so for example, especially with young children, for example, you wake up in the morning and something disrupts that, I sometimes find that really hard to, and I definitely can almost kind of not write the day off, but be like, that's it, it's not going to be good. And I'm not naturally that kind of person. Like, I'm naturally a kind of very positive kind of, find the opportunity in the day kind of individual. But do you find that there is a balance between having routine and structure and also being kind to yourself to accept the fact that stuff happens that disrupts that?
Yeah, absolutely, Lloyd. I know this is, I shared with you before we came into the podcast, I've done a lot of research over the last year about the role that structure and rituals and routines plays in our lives. And it's interesting because I teach on this, and I've just created a course that is to help people develop daily habits and structures and routines, because what I've learned through my research and also from my personal experience is that when we have structure and routines and rituals and daily practices, there is a level of safety and security, and also an opportunity to help us to regulate our nervous system, to help us become clear in our minds, to help us prepare for whatever the day has, got to throw at us. And so that structure, rituals and routines is something that I'd benefited from my own life, and yet at first resisted it because I thought it's going to take my freedom away.
Yep.
And this is one of the things that a lot of people think when they think about structure or rituals or routines, is that, will it take my freedom away? And if it gets interrupted by children or by a life event that we don't plan for, or that we never imagined would happen, then sometimes we can feel the frustration with that. And so where I've landed with it is structure and routine is absolutely necessary for our health and well-being. And again, this is supported by some of the world's top universities. So I mentioned at the moment how burnout I've experienced is on the rise with my clients. Well, when I did the research, that's statistically proven now as well. In fact, there was a publication by Deloitte that suggested 77% of US workers have experienced burnout in their current role at some point. And in the UK, 49% of UK workers are experiencing burnout right now. That's half our workforce.
It's mad.
Now,
it's
almost unfathomable when you think about the pressure and the stress that people are feeling. Now, subsequently, there is a ton of studies from universities such as Cambridge and Stanford and Yale and Harvard who have researched the role that structure and daily rituals and routines have on us, and they're one of the most effective ways to navigate times of challenges, including burnout, including loss, including grief, because it provides us with this sense of safety, provides us with this sense of having a space or a container where we can process what is going on in our minds and our bodies. And so for me, it's about having a structure, but then holding it lightly. And if something disrupts that structure, something comes in and means that structure or that routine is impacted, then developing a set of tools or approaches that can allow you to come back into the present and remember that, just because that routine was interrupted or something happened that you never accounted for, in the next moment you can come back into the present moment and start again, right? Every moment is an opportunity to renew. And how do we do that? Well, for me, it's things like breath work. For me, it's things like using all of the practice and meditation to bring me back into the center, to recognize when I'm feeling triggered or frustrated or anxious or overwhelmed, and learning to take a pause. And so many of my clients who I work with have learned throughout the day, and these are really busy people, really successful people, but they've learned how to punctuate their day with moments where they pause and they breathe. And if you take 6 diaphragmatic breaths, deep breaths into the belly, automatically you're beginning to regulate your nervous system. Now, success isn't determined by having a regulating nervous system. You can have success with a dysregulating nervous system. In fact, you see that in most of the major cities of the world. You come into London, most people that you'll connect with on some level have a nervous system which is switched on far too much. So they can get extreme success, but it almost always inevitably leads to some kind of burnout, stress, or overwhelm. Yet you can have the same success, but with a regulated nervous system, where you feel balanced, where you have clarity of mind, where you're making great decisions because you're rested, where you're making decisions that are for the greater good, where you develop this kindness and compassion and empathy for yourself and for others. That's all possible. And the way in which I believe is the most effective way to do that is by beginning to analyze your life and remove the things that are not important or priority, focus on the fewer things, and then develop a structure, a set of routines and habits that will allow you to focus on those things that matter most with this, this clarity of thought and this sense of well-being.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Without even I had about 2 or 3 other questions that I was going to ask, and you answered them without me asking them. So that was awesome. That was awesome. I'm conscious of time, I'm going to ask you one last question just before we wrap up, and that is kind of for you personally. What's the future? What does 2025 look like? What are you? What are the kind of the things that you're really excited about doing this year and over the next few years?
I think personally, I'm feeling inspired by what I'm building in the online space with our community. And I mentioned I created a course called Breakdown to Breakthrough, and that was in response to seeing people struggling in life but also not knowing how to develop daily habits or rituals and routines. So I created a course called Breakdown to Breakthrough, which is an amazing course. It's a 30-day experience, and I'm excited this year to get that out to as many people as possible. Aside from that, on a personal level, just to have fun and to be as playful. I've got an 8-year-old little girl, as you know, and yeah. I think sometimes we can get caught up in the seriousness of life. I think sometimes we forget to play, to have fun, to experience joy. And coming into this year, that was a big intention of mine, was focus on the fewer things in work, focus on the things that light me up, continue helping as many people as possible, and then in personal life, just have as much fun as you can. I think coupled with that, this journey for me is an ongoing journey of personal development and growth, and so I don't think that's ever going to leave me. I think this is going to be another year of becoming more curious to this journey of being human. So yeah, that's my personal project that I'm working on. The courses and the community online is what's lighting my spirit up.
Love it. Mate, thank you so much. You are. We spoke yesterday, and I seem to meet more people or come across more people who you work with as a coach without me even knowing, and I just think it's awesome. I just I said at the beginning, you're one of the most interesting and generous people that I know, and I think there's just so much that people can learn if they're just open-minded to exploring and thinking about how they lead their lives, how they live their life. And I think that there's, thankfully, I think in comparison to when you and I first met and worked together, there are lots of different ways that you can now approach your working life and your career without just following the same path and the same route that everybody else does. And that's really exciting, really interesting. So I would certainly encourage anyone who's listened to this, who's interested in kind of what you do, to reach out. It will be a connection well worth making, in my view. And thank you, mate. I really it's just super interesting, as you know. I always enjoy our conversations, and I hope everyone else listening sees value and finds this really insightful. Thank you, Lloyd. Can I also share one last thing? Just for anyone that's listening to this that maybe has felt like they are going through a difficult time, or they are finding the many different plates that they're spinning just overwhelming, my encouragement is to know that there is a way through that. And this might be someone who's listening to this that you're just beginning to feel the effects of everything that you're carrying or holding, or you might be feeling burned out. And from my experience personally, and also now from literally supporting thousands of others over the past decade, my encouragement is to know that there is a way through it, that you're not broken. You might feel it, but that within you there is this space of peace and wholeness that is simply needing to be rediscovered. And some of what we've shared today are ways in which to do that. I mentioned meditation, breath work, we've talked about journaling, coaching. My encouragement is to make a commitment today, set an intention that actually something is going to change, because that intention is the most important part. That moment where you say, okay, something has to give. It's time for me to make a change. It's time for me to find a coach. It's time for me to be open to different practices, routines, rituals, habits
that will allow me to be the best leader, the best parent, the best sibling, the best son, daughter, because I can't explain, Lloyd, and you know this, how much this has changed my own life and how much I see it impacting others. It is the greatest return on investment you'll ever make by investing that time into yourself, into filling up your cup and, you know, rediscovering that very best version of you. So I just wanted to share that with anyone that's listening who may be going through a tough time. Know that there is a way through, and please be open to setting that intention to change today.
Mate, thank you so much. I really, really hope people listen in and take a lot from this, because there's no better time of year to listen to an episode like this. I think it's, you know, the new year's full of hopefully optimism and promise and an opportunity for people and a chance to make change. So thank you. If anyone wants to reach out to you, I'm sure they will.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on, Lloyd.
Thank you, mate.
Great to connect.